It's morning, and the artificial sun has just risen on this northern forest terrarium. The residents of this closed ecosystem, most of which were spooked by the sudden bright light, soon resumed their usual activities, oblivious to the looming threat within their habitat, a menace that threatens to end life as they know it, a menace that could spell the end for many of these species inside this terrarium. But before we get to that, some other big things have been happening in this large terrarium. It's summer, and the result of this spring's mating season can be seen. This is an adolescent isopod. It's one of the first I've spotted this season. When they're first born, they often remain hidden, underground, or undercover, following their mother for the first several days or even weeks of their life. This one, along with others, is on its own for the first time in its life. Meanwhile, it looks like mom is trying to get as far away from her children as possible. Springtails also seem to have produced a new generation, though with how much of their population has exploded lately, I don't think they care about this season. Every season is mating season for them. The juvenile springtails are hard to spot. In this shot, it's the small white dot that is darting around the much larger isopod. The isopods and springtails, both of which are forager species, will serve as prey for a new generation of centipedes. A total of 3 juvenile centipedes were spotted on this morning, which is the most I've ever seen at once. Though they are much smaller than the fully grown centipedes within this habitat, these are still probably at least a few months old, though it's hard to tell. The young centipedes struggle to hunt their prey, which is usually springtails. They use their antennae as feelers and can strike with surprising speed and ferocity, but usually the springtail is still too quick. Here's an older shot of an adult centipede demonstrating how to successfully catch a springtail. Its larger jaws and legs allow for more reach, though I'm sure experience plays a role here as well. As I've mentioned previously, springtail populations have exploded in recent months, and it's good to see that centipede populations are keeping up and will hopefully keep their population levels in check. Life is good in this terrarium. It's thriving, diverse, and the varying species continue to balance each other out. But a dangerous enemy is in their midst, an enemy that threatens prey and predator alike, an enemy that is slowly taking over this closed ecosystem, an enemy that could represent an extinction level event for many, if not all, species within this terrarium. Fungus. Nearly a year ago, I first spotted some fungus growing within this ecosystem. It quickly overtook a small bunch of moss, but then appeared to die. Over the winter months, I continued to watch for this fungus or other varieties, with some spots popping up from time to time. It wasn't a huge concern at the time. However, with increased ambient temperature within this terrarium, as summer temperatures warm the inside of my home, and the constant 100% absolute humidity, this white fungus has begun to threaten the very existence of this terrarium. And I'll explain why. Thus far, the fungus is mostly relegated to the half of the tank that is closest to the light source. I don't know if the light, heat, and moisture gradient have played a role in its spread, but it thus far appears to have not reached the far half of the tank, leaving much of the moss, substrate, and wood untouched on that side. But I'm not convinced those areas are unreachable by the mindless white organism. Now, my first reaction was to call this white fungus mold. However, people smarter than myself have informed me that this is probably mycelium, which is just part of the body of either a mold or mushroom, and that this is probably from a mushroom, though I have yet to see actual mushrooms in this terrarium. It could be a mold, but I'll continue to just call it fungus for the sake of simplicity. Why am I worried about this fungus? It doesn't appear to actively eat or kill any of the other living organisms within this tank. However, as you can see, it will cover entire beds of moss and has even begun to cover this plant. By doing so, it can prevent the plant from receiving enough light, which ultimately leads to its death, allowing the malignant growth to then move in for the dead carcass of the plant. And in a closed environment, we know that no plants means no photosynthesis, and that means no oxygen. A lack of oxygen could kill every living creature in this terrarium. In the wild, the process of a fungus spreading is mitigated by environmental factors like rain, humidity, and temperature changes. It also helps that there's often a broader variety of organisms that consume the fungus. Inside this terrarium, however, the air is still and moist, creating a perfect environment for the slow spread of and the survival of this fungus. Some at this point will bring up the topic of springtails. Conventional wisdom among terrarium owners is that springtails will essentially eat any fungus that tries to take hold in your terrarium. But I can assure you that the springtails that I have must be picky eaters. And mind you, everything in this terrarium was sourced from essentially the same location in a natural habitat. These creatures and this mold and these plants have all coexisted in nature. And it's curious that for whatever reason, these springtails, which there's an abundance of, is not actually controlling the spread of this fungus. I have yet to see any springtails actively munching on this white fungus. I have a lot of shots of them avoiding it, but none of them actually consuming it. Thus, this fuzzy menace continues its spread. Life continues as normal in this terrarium, but for how much longer? When is the tipping point? When will too much fungus kill too many plants and start to limit oxygen levels and kill the hundreds of small animals inside this terrarium? Within a month, at its current pace, this fungus could cover most of the moss in this terrarium, choking out the plant life and preventing light from reaching the plant's surface. I also ask myself, is there anything I can do to prevent such an outcome? Since this is mostly a closed terrarium, I try to limit my intervention, but besides, I'm not sure if there's anything I can do short of taking out the fungus and everything it covers and replacing it with new moss, wood, and substrate, which really goes against the idea of this being an experiment that is allowed to run with limited human intervention. I could try rotating the terrarium 180 degrees, which would then shift the light, temperature, and humidity gradient to the other side of the tank, but I'm not sure if that would kill the existing fungus, probably not, and it will potentially make the other side of the terrarium, which is currently fungus-free, a better home for the fungus. And I'm also not sold on the idea of springtails being the fix. I have at least 3 different species in here, and they don't seem to be making a difference. So, for now, life continues in the northern forest terrarium. But normal in this terrarium is changing, and at some point in the near future, something's got to give. I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe for more updates on this terrarium as well as other terrariums in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.